Coming up on this episode, Steve Kerr's backflip into returning to the Golden State Warriors puts some pressure on the four-time championship winning coach entering next season. Plus, could Golden State pull off an incredible superstar double act this offseason as they pursue not one, but multiple stars? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you've all had a good week. Steve Kerr's return to the Golden State Warriors as head coach was made official earlier this week. And there was a fantastic story on Thursday from Wright Thompson of ESPN, which went through so many different things, not just within the past few weeks, but the entirety of Steve Kerr's life and some things that I wanted to pull out of that. A must read for anyone that hasn't already. Kerr was basically out as Warriors coach. He was basically headed into retirement. He himself was essentially 95% on the way out until that first play-in tournament victory over the LA Clippers. And I think we all knew that was a pretty monumental moment just to get that kind of performance from Steph Curry and Draymond Green in that moment to give us something to head into the offseason with. But until now, we didn't really know how monumental it was, to the point where that win in itself might have been the catalyst, or was the catalyst, to Steve Kerr returning to the Warriors for at least a further 2 seasons. And it was a remarkable performance. Obviously, the stunning comeback in the fourth quarter, Al Horford hitting 4 threes, Steph hitting big shots, Draymond defense on Kawhi. It was remarkable, but in the context of Golden State's season, guess what? Like, it didn't really matter. They went out and got eliminated anyway and didn't make the playoffs after falling to the Phoenix Suns 48 hours later. So in the context of the season, it didn't mean anything at all. But of course, in the context of Steve Kerr's entire career, it meant everything. And I do wonder if we should be worried at all that one game actually dictated Steve Kerr's future with the franchise. Because I don't think that should be the case. Any one game, particularly in an NBA season, it's 82 games long, and then you've got the play-in tournament, the playoffs, if you make it that far. Like, one game shouldn't dictate a coach's future. Unfortunately, like, it does in some ways, and there's coaches that get axed or fired because of one particular game. But in terms of someone coming back, should we be concerned at all about the backflip of Kerr saying, hey, I'm 95% out, I'm heading into retirement, and then one victory, again, a pretty meaningless one in the context of their season, being enough to bring him back? On one hand, I think it really tugs to the essence of sport. And when we think about it, like, this is the fantastic thing about sport, is that it brings so much passion and excitement that things can drastically change on a whim. Like, one day you're waking up and you think, I'm heading into retirement, and then later that night you're celebrating a play-in tournament victory and you're like, no chance. I'm going on. I'm continuing. So I love that sport brings us that. But at the same time, in a long NBA regular season, I'm not sure that should be necessarily dictating what your future is. What I will say is, like, again, for those of you that have listened to me, like, I've been pretty on the fence about this. If Steve wanted to return, I was open to Steve returning. I'm not as critical of him as many in the fan base are. I'm very open to being critical of Steve Kerr. I'm very open to being critical of any player or anyone within the organization when I think the time calls for it. I think some of the hate on Steve Kerr has been a little bit overblown. I think the injuries that the Warriors suffered this season were obviously catastrophic with Jimmy Butler and Moses Moody, and put Kerr in a position where I don't think any coach could have got the Warriors out of the position they were in, and ultimately finishing 10th in the Western Conference and failing to make the playoffs, obviously missing Steph Curry for 27 games. No coach was going to be able to dig the Warriors out of the hole that the injuries forced them into, essentially. And so I don't put the blame on Steve Kerr for what happened this season. What I will say, though, is that Golden State have now failed to make the playoffs 4 of the past 7 seasons. And Steve Kerr mentioning that he was 95% out, that he was about to head into retirement, and then backflipping, those kind of comments to me in this story, fantastic story by Wright Thompson, put some pressure on Steve entering next season. Now, you could say, well, he's a 4-time championship winning coach. Like, what are the actual expectations on this team entering next season? Because I don't think any of us are sitting here right now and thinking this team's going to be a championship contender unless they can do something massive this offseason. So how much pressure should Steve Kerr really be under? I just think if the Warriors were to get off to a poor start next season, then we're going to be looking back at like this time and thinking, was it really the right decision from Steve personally to go on? Was it really the right decision for him to be dictated to by one game, essentially, and having that spark and passion reignited by one victory? Or was that just a mirage to him and his real desire of being fairly tired, understanding that this is, in his own words, a fading dynasty and that he really shouldn't be going on anymore? And I know Steve doesn't have to go out there and physically play, but he's in a very similar situation to Steph and Draymond and Al Horford, and name whatever veteran player you want to bring up. These guys are still capable of being the absolute very best in the league, right? Particularly when it comes to Steph. And I think Steve is still capable of being one of the most elite coaches in the league. But you get to a point in your career, and again, I know Steve isn't going onto the floor and doing anything from a physical standpoint, but there's a mental and there's an emotional toll to this, and a toll that stems from so many deep playoff runs, from 4 NBA championships, 6 trips to the NBA finals, 12 seasons as a head coach in the NBA, all the travel that's involved in it. And very much like his veteran players, there could be times next season where Steve Kerr's not quite at his best. Because should we be expecting him to be at his best on a consistent basis across an 82-game season? Well, now that he's returned as head coach and you're still trying to push for playoff relevance as Steph enters the final years of his career, yes, we should have some expectation that Steve Kerr is going to be one of the best coaches in the league next season. But I'm not necessarily assuming that's going to be the case because of these comments. Is he going to be 100%, 110% all in to this? He can say that he is right now, absolutely no worries. But come a cold Tuesday night in Minnesota next year, or the game in Chicago, or wherever you want to call it, like, is he going to be ready to continue the 82-game fight? Because we can look at the Warriors and think, you know what, they're a veteran team. They're still built for the playoffs somewhat. They could still make some noise in the playoffs. Well, they've got to get to that point first and foremost. I think that's the most important thing is they've got to build a roster that can withstand guys resting, guys getting injured and stuff like that, because they are an older veteran team, and actually be able to finish 5th or 6th in the Western Conference, which even now at this point, that seems like a pretty tough task and a challenging task in a Western Conference that's only getting better. You've got the Thunder and the Spurs at the top. You've got teams like the Utah Jazz who go out and trade for Jaren Jackson Jr. and then get a top pick in this lottery. They've got Larry Markin and Keontae George are going to get Walker Kessler back, assuming they can re-sign him in restricted free agency. They're going to take a jump. How many teams are actually going to fall off the cliff in the West next season? Not many, I wouldn't have thought. If you're looking at the teams that finished above the Warriors this season, who's necessarily falling back of their own accord, right? We'll wait and see. But I do think there is, like, these comments from Steve and this backflip from Steve, combined with Golden State's recent history of missing the playoffs more often than not, albeit they did win a title during that period as well, does put some pressure on him entering next season. Because I think as fans, we as fans can say, yes, it's no longer championship or bust, because I think that's an unfair expectation. But there has to be a bar set, right? And that bar is still fairly high in terms of, can you make the second round of the playoffs, for example? If I sit here today and say my expectations is second round of the playoffs, you think, geez, that's a massive fall from where the Warriors once were. But I think making the second round of the playoffs next season is going to be bloody difficult. So let me know what you think on this entire story on Steve Kerr, which again was fantastic and a must read, and how much pressure you think Steve faces next season, and just the worry, I suppose, from the fact that he was essentially headed into retirement backflip on the basis of one game. Let me know. Could the Warriors launch themselves back up the Western Conference standings next season thanks to a ridiculous superstar double act? Could the Warriors lure themselves not only LeBron James, but also Kawhi Leonard as well? Sounds ridiculous, I know. Sounds ludicrous. It's incredibly unlikely, let's be honest. But it is also theoretically possible. Let's start with LeBron, who, after the Lakers were eliminated at the hands of the Oklahoma City Thunder in a second-round series sweep, will become a free agent this offseason. And we think, well, we believe that he's finally going to be willing to take far less money than the max or near the max. And I'm not convinced he's going to take the absolute minimum. But if you're a team like the Warriors, depending on what happens with Draymond Green and Kristaps Porzingis, the Warriors could get themselves full access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And I think offering that to LeBron is going to be a little bit more bearable to him probably than taking the minimum and going all the way down to that, entering what would probably be the final year of his NBA career. It's pretty simple. Like, does LeBron want to come to the Warriors and play with Steph and Draymond or not? Because I think the Warriors would accommodate it. We as fans can talk about for hours on end where we want our longtime rival from 4 straight trips to the NBA Finals competing against one another. We can talk for hours whether we want him, that guy, to join the franchise. But I have no doubt whatsoever that those within the organization want LeBron James. We know that. They've tried to trade for him on multiple occasions during the past couple of mid-season deadlines, including, I think, most notably the 2023 mid-season deadline, or was it 2024? One of the two where LeBron obviously, basically Jeannie Buss, as controlling owner of the Lakers at that point, went to LeBron and said, do you want this? And Rich Paul and LeBron kind of shut it down rather quickly. But obviously, now that he's a free agent, it becomes a little bit more possible for a team like the Warriors or a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, New York Knicks, other teams that have been linked to LeBron James. It becomes a little bit more possible for them to be able to acquire him than obviously if there had to be a trade and the dude's making $50 million. So does LeBron want to play for the Warriors? Because I have no doubt that the Warriors want LeBron and he's going to be their biggest and most notable free agency target this offseason. I think Draymond holds the key to basically all of this, aside from obviously it just being LeBron's decision. Like, it'll just come down to LeBron. But I think Draymond holds the key here for multiple reasons. First of all, he's going to have to opt out and take significantly less money on potentially a multi-year deal at a much lower annual number to then accommodate being able to sign LeBron James and taking and having access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So Draymond holds the key from a financial standpoint. I think his relationship with LeBron, like Steph and Steve Kerr have relationships, pretty strong relationships with with LeBron now, particularly after winning gold together at the winning gold together for Team USA at the 2024 Olympics. So they have relationships, but I don't think anyone's closer to LeBron within the Warrior organization than Draymond Green. So therefore, Draymond's relationship in trying to recruit LeBron James is a huge factor. And then there's another factor here another aspect that I think is just as important to the financial and the relationship aspect. And that is just the actual on-court fit. Because Draymond Green and LeBron James, high IQ guys, I think they could close games together and whatnot. But if you want to play like another center, or if you want to play a traditional center, I suppose, with size, then I don't think LeBron and Draymond make a whole lot of sense on the floor together, because we know LeBron wants to kind of handle the ball and be a playmaker. We know Draymond wants to handle the ball and be a playmaker. Obviously, LeBron's a far better scorer and just a far better offensive player. But some of the skill set kind of overlaps there a little bit. Obviously, not elite three-point shooters by any means. LeBron's had a couple of seasons recently where he's been pretty efficient. Draymond, we know defense is going to leave him wide open from the perimeter. So if you're having those two guys and then you're either if you're bringing back Jimmy Butler, for example, because you could add LeBron and keep Jimmy, That just doesn't make much sense from an on-court fit standpoint, at least to start games, I wouldn't have thought. So to me, if I'm the Warriors and going out and signing LeBron James, I'm telling Draymond, okay, we want you back. We want you part of the mix. We want you to take less so we can offer LeBron the non-taxpayer MLE or whatever. But my other thing to Draymond would be, you're probably going to come off the bench. If you want LeBron James on this team, you are probably going to come off the bench because LeBron might move teams this offseason, but he's not moving to a team where he becomes a six-man. He's not moving into a bench role. I actually do not think LeBron James will ever play again off the bench in the NBA. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen. So if I'm the Warriors, I'm going to Draymond and saying, you're probably moving into a six-man role most likely. Right? If we keep Jimmy, maybe you remain in a starting role then, but when Jimmy comes back and gets back up to speed, you're probably going to be moved to the bench. Now, we could close with you as a small ball five and get away with that potentially. But again, I think the days of Draymond Green starting at the 5 spot, like, let's be honest, let's move on from that. Please, I'm begging you, Steve Kerr. So Draymond holds the key financially, from a relationship standpoint, and from an on-court fit standpoint. Move back to the bench, be in a 6th, 7th man role, play 20, 22 minutes a game. Have that be reflective of your contract to some degree as well, in terms of the expectations placed upon you. Still be, hopefully, one of the most impactful defenders in the league. I've always said that Draymond, I think, still holds value to this team, just not on the contract that he has in terms of his player option for next season at $27.6 million. So Draymond holds the key to this. If the Warriors go out and get LeBron, they're still going to have the Jimmy contract to utilize, potentially in a trade if they want to. And I think of all star big name players the Warriors have been linked to already this offseason, I think Kawhi Leonard might be the most realistic target for the Warriors and the most likely. If I was to put like LeBron, KD, Giannis, Kawhi, whatever star you want to name, like, together and pick out one as the most likely that the Warriors can actually land this offseason, Kawhi Leonard's the one for me, because there's a lot of noise around this now. Spoke about it on last episode after Sunday's draft lottery, where the Clippers got the 5th overall pick. And since then, in the days following, there's been even more talk that the Clippers could enter more of a rebuild mode, or at least a different timeline and direction than what Kawhi is currently on as a 34-year-old. Now, we know the Warriors, after their Giannis pursuit, quickly pivoted to Kawhi and were trying to get a deal done for Kawhi before the mid-season deadline, but the Clippers shut that down. NBA insider Jake Fisher has said a couple of days ago that essentially the Clippers and Kawhi could now be headed in 2 different directions after the Clippers were able to land that 5th overall pick. So you've got the news there. You've got Draymond bringing up Kawhi's future as a result of the Clippers getting a top pick, and then mentioning Golden State in the same sentence, essentially. Not the first time that Draymond has kind of aired potential plans for the Warriors, I suppose, or just discussed his own team's plans on his podcast, but still notable that he's brought Kawhi up in the same conversation as the Warriors. So there's just so much, I think, linking Kawhi and the Warriors right now. There was even some, like, before and after that play-in game, there was some really weirdly kind words said by, like, Steph and Draymond about Kawhi, and then, like, Kawhi about Steve Kerr and Steph and Draymond and stuff like that. It felt a little bizarre to me. It was like, they're being really nice. Like, they're being super nice. It's very strange. And so I'm looking at this, and the biggest obstacle to it, I think, still remains Steve Ballmer, to be honest, as Clippers owner. Does he really want to trade his franchise star to a direct Pacific rival? I think they might be ready to move on from Kawhi Leonard, but do they want to trade him to the Warriors? I'm not convinced. We know a couple of years ago when the Warriors, or a few years ago now, when the Warriors were trying to pursue Paul George, the Clippers didn't really want to go through with that one. Now, that might have been more for obviously financial reasons, and they just let him walk in free agency rather than take back money and whatever else the Warriors were offering up in a trade. So I think Steve Ballmer's still like, you're going to have to convince him that the trade from the Warriors is worthwhile. What would the trade look like? Clearly, Jimmy's going to have to be involved in it. I don't love trading Jimmy Butler for Kawhi Leonard because Kawhi's got injury concerns, but I do think Kawhi's a better player than Jimmy, and Kawhi should be able to play for you at the start of next season, obviously. And he's actually coming off a year where he appeared in 65 games, was arguably a career best season from a numbers standpoint. That makes me feel a little bit nervous because I think it could be buying high on him rather than buying low after like an injury-plagued season where his numbers weren't that great or whatever. Like Kawhi had a fantastic season, so you might be buying high to some degree. How many picks does it take? I would say 2. It'd be interesting to know whether or not the Warriors would include this year's 11th overall pick. Mark Spears reported earlier on Thursday that the Warriors want to keep that pick. I don't know if that's just messaging from the Warriors, basically trying to convince everyone else that they want to keep the pick, essentially, and as part of like trade negotiations, just like airing that publicly. What holds more value, the 11th overall pick this year or like an unprotected first in 2032? If I was the Clippers, I'd probably take the unprotected first in 2032. Like Kawhi's 34 years old at the end of the day. And that's the other factor to this is Kawhi Leonard is extension eligible. He's going to be entering on an expiring contract next season. Just like what happened with Jimmy, I think the Warriors would have to have conversations with Kawhi and his camp on what an extension would look like before actually completing the trade, because you don't want to give up Jimmy and like multiple first round picks for a guy for 1 year. I wouldn't have thought. Although, again, I could see some teams talking themselves into that if they think they're really close. The Warriors, are they close enough to be able to take a risk like that? I don't know. I think you'd feel more comfortable if, like Jimmy, there was a contract extension in place. But are you just going to go out and give Kawhi $50 million for another couple of years and have him making over $50 million at 36, 37 years old, given his injury history? That's a bit of a problem. Can you negotiate with him to get that down to like $35, $40 million a year in extension, like a 2 years, 75 or something like that? I don't know. We'll wait and see. But that's another factor with Kawhi Leonard. I think that's an obstacle, the contract. Steve Ballmer's an obstacle as well. But there is a theoretical world here in which the Warriors can sign LeBron James and trade for Kawhi Leonard or like Kevin Durant or Giannis. I think most likely the most realistic path is Kawhi. The other, I suppose, factor in this is what would Kawhi and LeBron think about playing with each other and joining up with Steph and Draymond and being coached by Steve Kerr. Like, there's so many personalities at play here. Would they all be able to get on the same page to try and win a championship? I think at this respective points of their career, they would be, but there could still be some interesting things to monitor there, I think, as the season progressed. And it would be just must-watch basketball. It would be, if LeBron James went to the Warriors and there was no trade, like that in itself, Steph playing with LeBron would be, clearly the Warriors, the most watched team in the league, would be absolutely unbelievable. But like throw Kawhi into the mix, like it would just be, like the best reality TV show in the world, essentially, just following them on a nightly and daily basis. It would be crazy. And obviously, if they got Kawhi, I think even with the age of the team, even with the injury-plagued nature of the team, I think the team would be really good. I think the team would be a guaranteed top 5 seed in the Western Conference. Okay, at least for next season, I think the team would be fantastic. Obviously, injuries could happen and things could change, but I mean, you got a team with Steph, Draymond, LeBron, Kawhi. You probably bring back Al Horford. You might be able to keep Brandon Pajamski, G. Santos. Moses Moody will come back at some point. Like, that's going to be a very, very good team. There's no doubt about that. But let me know. Can the Warriors land LeBron James? Can they land Kawhi Leonard? Could they get both? Are there any other targets out there that you want the Warriors to chase this summer? I'm going to finish up there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you have to subscribe to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. And follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And I'll see you on the next episode.